Joining us this morning, first guest today is Brad White, Executive Director of the Mississippi Department of Transportation. Kind enough to come in studio this morning. Brad, good morning. Merry Christmas to you.
Good morning. Merry Christmas. Thank you for having me.
Certainly appreciate you coming in. Roads and bridges, roads and bridges, roads and bridges. The conversation never stops, and it's on the mind of Mississippians. I'm sure it's on the mind of the legislature. I know it's on your mind as well, as we're now just about 4 weeks away from the start of a new legislative session. In terms of agenda items and what is at the top of your to-do list or your need-to-do list, where do we start?
Recurring revenue. I mean, that's the most important thing to us, is looking at our funding model and trying to determine the best, most practical way of modernizing that funding model to where it can successfully and adequately provide us the resources we need to stay ahead of the maintenance needs in our state and to also continue the capacity construction program. As you know, what we do is a reimbursement program. We spend our state funds when Federal Highway Administration is able to ascertain that we've done everything according to their standards and met with their regulations, then they reimburse us with the federal funds that's been assigned to Mississippi through the reauthorization of Federal Highway. So if you think about it, we kind of have a bank account that keeps about $150 million in it, and that money's like the water of a river. It's never the same one day after the other. Money's always going out and always coming in. So the nature of the way our federal program works, it's not only important that we get the resources we need, but how we get them is equally as important. So We've had a lot of conversations with legislative leadership in trying to determine the most appropriate manner in which we could modernize that funding model to provide us a dedicated stream of revenue to accomplish what the taxpayers expect from us.
So, Brad, to me, there's a really simple solution here. But I'm curious if you think the legislature has the appetite for a significant, serious conversation about the gas tax, because we know that our gas tax, when it was put in place, in the early 80s, I think it was?
Last time it was adjusted was 1987.
Okay.
And that's always been part of the conversation. Traditionally, we have put all of our transportation dollars for roads and bridges in the basket of the gas tax. Personally, I think that when we talk about modernizing our funding model, 1 cent of fuel tax generates about $24 million. Of that, MDOT gets about $17 million of it. I personally don't think that it would be responsible to vest. I don't think you could raise it enough to give us the resources we need and still make it okay on the taxpayer. So I think what we must do, and what we've been suggesting to the legislative leadership, is what other states have done, and that's looking at a more diversified approach, one that wouldn't require tax increases, one that is able to find dedicated streams of revenue throughout the state's budget that collectively can come up with the resources necessary to dedicate to these projects to keep them moving without putting an undue burden on the taxpayer. Our goal is to try to have, as governing authorities, in my opinion, should be to lessen the burden on the taxpayer, but still be able to have the resources necessary to provide the core functions of government. And I believe you don't get more core than providing a transportation system. So hopefully the conversation will be not just about looking at fuel tax, but also looking at other streams of revenue like the use tax, like some of the gaming revenue, like other resources that the legislature in the past have dedicated to local governments and others for infrastructure purposes that helped kind of offset some of the inadequacies of the fuel tax revenue as of date. So I think there's a path to do that. I believe there's an appetite to do that. I've not met anybody under the Capitol Dome that's anti-transportation. So I think it's just a matter of finding a champion that's willing to say, okay, it's time that we take care of this core function of government once and for all so that we can continue maintaining the investment the taxpayers have at the level that the Federal Highway Administration expects us to, along with the taxpayers, and also continue the capacity construction program that builds out our system and makes it efficient. One thing that I want to point out, when you're driving on 55 near Gluckstadt or up in DeSoto County or areas around the coast, other areas around the metro area, Meridian, Warren County, and you experience congestion, the reason we have that today in Mississippi is because about 12 to 15 years ago, due to a funding shortage, the Commission had to divert all available funds to the maintenance of our system, which we have metrics we must hit. And so the program designed to keep adding efficiency to our transportation system was basically shelved. And luckily, thanks to additional money in the reauthorization of federal highway, by in large part to Senator Roger Wicker, who was the lead Republican crafting that bill, as well as investments of one-time money from the legislature over the last 3 years, we've been able to revamp and restart that capacity construction program. But without addressing this funding model and modernizing that in a way that we can have adequate recurring revenue, sooner or later the decision is going to have to be made to shelf that program once again and go back to maintenance. And that's just not in the best interest of our state from an economic development standpoint. From every other standpoint, as I've said, it doesn't matter how good our public schools are if the school buses cease to be able to cross bridges. And it doesn't matter how good your health care is if the ambulance gets stuck in traffic on the way to the hospital. And you can recruit all the businesses you want, but if they can't get their goods and their people in and out of this state in a timely manner, then they're going to have problems coming. So this is a core function of government. It's time that we deal with it and deal with it in a very responsible, taxpayer-friendly way.
I hear what you're saying about not putting an undue burden on the taxpayer, and I certainly don't disagree with that. But wouldn't an increase in the gas tax be more fair than some of the taxes that we see to the taxpayer?
Sure,
because it is truly a usage tax. You are paying for what you use on the roads and bridges in the state of Mississippi.
No, you're exactly right. The problem is we're running about a $485 million deficit in maintenance. To continue cash flowing the capacity program, assuming there would be no more one-time investments in it, you would need another $100 to $150 million. And 1 cent of fuel tax generates $23 million a year, of which we get 17 to 18 million of. So you're talking about, in order to erase those types of deficiencies in the funding, you're talking about more than a significant increase in the fuel tax. But I also think that as vehicles become more efficient in traveling, as our roadways are better, I mean, the idea of keeping all of our eggs in that basket, I don't think in the long run will be smart for the taxpayer. I do think that we have to have a diversified approach of coming up with the funding so that we're not reliant on just one area.
Brad, how does our gas tax compare to other states in our region? And probably you would, take Florida, Texas, Tennessee out of that because they don't have state income tax?
Yeah, we're the lowest in the country with the exception of Alaska.
The lowest by how much?
I don't know, several cents. It's been a little bit since I've looked at that. I'd have to go back and check. But I know Alaska's the only state that has a lower fuel tax rate than we do.
Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking, I mean, if it was bumped by 10 cents a gallon, and I know that's significant, I mean, that's $170 million a year recurring that you count on based on that 17 million of the 23 million per penny you're talking about, right?
Right. I think, but again, when you look at the amount of money needed in order to continue that maintenance program and continue the capacity construction program, there would have to be more than just that. There's going to have to be some other diversified manner in which you look at the budget overall and determine how are we going to come up with the revenue needed. And look, this has been done before. The counties and cities receive a portion of the fuel tax. And so the legislature, instead of raising the fuel tax, gave them 15% of the use tax to supplement the shortfall they were receiving in their fuel tax revenue to help take care of some of the county and municipality needs. So this has been done before, to where you find, fuel tax, use tax, and other streams of revenue that together you've been able to piece together the amount of money needed to run a successful and efficient program. So that's all we're suggesting, is do the same thing that's been done before, just do it with MDOT.
People always want to know about the projects that are going on right now and the projects that are on the docket in the future. And I know sometimes that's a little bit of a moving target. We'll address some of those when we come back. Brad White, Executive Director of the Mississippi Department of Transportation. I hope you don't get weary of talking about the funding model.
No.
I know it feels like a little bit like a broken record when we have this conversation, but it is, I think, the most relevant piece of this conversation as we move toward a new legislative session. Quick timeout, more with Brad White, Executive Director at MDOT. This is the Gallo Radio Show on Super Talk Mississippi. Good to be with you on the Gallo Radio Show on Super Talk Mississippi. Brad White is our guest, Executive Director at the Mississippi Department of Transportation, talking about funding models, the upcoming legislative session, and a topic that people are very, very passionate about, road projects in their neck of the woods. I know that's not a very scientific term, but those are going on, Brad, all over the state of Mississippi. It's this ongoing process that never, ever stops because it's not just construction and maintenance, but it's, relaying asphalt and all of the things that have to be done. How do you tackle that? How do you decide what is most necessary? Because what I view as most necessary might not be the same thing that somebody in Lowndes County views as most necessary, or Attala County.
The most
or wherever.
important road in the world is going to go right in front of whoever you're talking to at any given moment.
That's right. That's right.
We try to be very data driven. The Federal Highway Administration requires that for us to use the federal money on all of the maintenance. If you think about it, we've got about 33,000 miles of highway that we have to maintain, over 5,000 bridges. It's a total investment that the asset is valued at about $65 billion, and we've got an annual budget now that's as big as it's ever been at about $1.4 billion with which to try to tackle that. So it's kind of like the old saying about how to eat an elephant one bite at a time.
Yeah.
But about every year we have a team with our research division and others that go with Federal Highway, and they inspect all of the interstate lane miles in the state. And every other year, we're evaluating in the same manner the rest of the highway system. And so from that, you have metrics that the federal government expects us to hit. A certain percentage of your roadways have to be in good shape, a certain percentage in fair, and only a certain percentage would be allowed to be in what's considered poor. Mm-hmm. So we have to dedicate the revenue necessary to keep enough maintenance projects going to meet those federal requirements so that we don't risk losing the federal money. And that's where I was talking about 12 or 15 years ago that the commission ran into a funding issue with that, and where we were not going to be able to do that and continue building out our system, turning 2 lanes into 4 lanes, building bypasses, doing all the things necessary to make to avoid congestion and make the system suitable to carry the amount of traffic that is on it. And so they had to cancel that program to put all the money that MDOT had towards maintenance or risk losing the federal dollars. Luckily, within the last 3 years, we've been in a financial situation where we were able to go back and look at some of these capacity projects, which without the help of the legislature and the Congress, we wouldn't have been able to do. But primarily our ability to do that has been because of the one-time money that we've received. And so our concern is that sooner or later the one-time money is going to stop. And if we haven't addressed the bigger problem, which is the lack of revenue in that dedicated stream of funding that comes to us with which to tackle all of these things, that we're going to be back in the same situation that we found ourselves in a little over a decade ago, only this time we're going to start off a lot deeper in the hole. So hopefully we'll be able to avoid that. And look, I've got to tell you, I've had really good conversations with members of the legislature. Chairman Trey Lamar, Speaker Jason White on the House side are actively looking at ways to try to address this need and pulling data. The Lieutenant Governor's staff are in constant contact with us. And it's not just MDOT. If you look at the state aid road system that the state operates on behalf of the counties, that goes through municipalities and counties, they're running at about $100 million deficit in order to reach all of the needs that they have. And I know that that's going to be a top priority of the Supervisors Association coming in, and I look forward to partnering with them to hopefully see this session become somewhat of an infrastructure session,
Are roundabouts as popular throughout the state of Mississippi as they are in my hometown of Oxford?
No, it depends. If what I've observed is when we install the first one in an area that's not used to them, people don't like it at all. But after it's been there and that people become used to it, they recognize that it really does enhance the traffic's ability to continue moving because you're not bringing anybody to a stop. and that it functions better, it's safer, and it's easier than traffic signals and things like that. So in areas like you mentioned in Oxford, where they've gotten used to it, it's become kind of the new fad where we get requests for more in certain areas, So I think it's just a matter of people where they're used to it and they like it,
Yeah. I'm assuming you have looked at other transportation administrations in either surrounding states regionally or other parts of the country. Mm-hmm. Who's doing it exceptionally well? Is everybody facing the same budgetary shortfall that we're facing in Mississippi when it comes to roads and bridges and falling short of those numbers? Or are there states that are really, really doing this well?
Well, it's a little bit of both. I think that the surrounding states around us have probably done a better job of keeping their funding model current, of finding ways to generate revenue, to dedicate to infrastructure. I think our team at MDOT, I would put the work that we do up against any of the other states, given the tools and resources that we have. Thanks to the 87 4-lane program, I mean, there's a lot of areas where if you're coming into Mississippi from Alabama or Louisiana or Arkansas or Tennessee, that you'll ride into the state on a 2-lane highway, and when you hit Mississippi's state line, you're on a 4-lane highway, and traffic becomes a little bit easier. So it depends on how you want to judge that. The thing that if we were to try to model our surrounding states, it would be looking at the funding model again and just trying to find a more modern way to deal with today's needs. I mean, when I worked in Senator Cochran's office, the federal fuel tax hasn't been adjusted since I think the Reagan White House. And, Congress has the ability that they would look at whatever deficit the Highway Trust Fund was going to have due to lack of proper revenue, and they would just get that number and then appropriate that amount of money into the Highway Trust Fund to make up the difference. But state governments don't have the ability to do that along the lines that Congress does. So we have to come up with streams of revenue that would work. And other states have things where they've got special projects that they build by referendum, and people vote on them, and then they see where the money's going. They've had a series of a program that some states have put out to say this is the direction in which we plan to go in with this new stream of revenue that they would levy and adopt. Other states have done things similar to what we've done on a grander scale, where they find multiple streams within the state budget that they would dedicate in to infrastructure that I think would be a good model for us to look at. And one of the things that we've tried to do in the past, my feeling was that the legislature never really trusted MDOT to do with the money that they gave us what we should do. And maybe there was reason for some of that lack of relationship in the past. But I do feel like we've set the table now to where the legislative members and our congressional delegation, when they give MDOT money, they can now have full confidence that those dollars are going directly to projects that are benefiting their constituents. We provide them a 3-year plan that the Commission just adopted last year that kind of gives a snapshot in time of all the maintenance projects, of all the capacity projects, of all the operational projects, the safety projects by county that we have scheduled, and showing where we've taken 100% of the funds that we're generating and we obligate that toward projects. And this document kind of indicates the direction in which we're going and how cost of goods and potential grants we may receive may cause that list to alter over the year. But it does allow them to have a good sense of what we're doing with the resources they give us. And so I hope that we've seen an increase in confidence on the part of our state and federal leaders in the agency and in our ability to take what they give us and invest it. One thing I do want to mention, we are the Department of Transportation. So while we're responsible and we're judged by the highways and bridges that we take care of, we do have a ports and airports and rail and public transit the division that we try to operate in. And a couple of years ago, the legislature created a new strategic multimodal fund that they invested, I think, $35 million the first year, that we worked with our ports and airports and rail around the state to try and take that investment and leverage additional federal dollars that was made available to those particular modes. And I think with that $35 million, we leveraged over $120 million in federal funds that was invested back into the state of Mississippi. So, again, hopefully this will be a session that we look at the positive nature and the positive outcome of the investments that are made into our transportation system and the return on those investments and why it would make sense for us to continue doing that.
Could Mississippi ever see toll roads?
You know, when I worked at MDOT the first time, I've been there here twice. This is my second stint here. The legislature gave the department the authority to build toll roads. It had to be an alternate route, or it had to be, certain things about it. I think in 2008 there was a road that was going to be built between downtown Jackson out to the airport that met the financial model that the investor that was going to build the road could see that he would get the return on the investment. And then the economy tanked, and that opportunity went away. We have the ability to do it. It's just a matter of finding a project that would encourage the investors to come in and make that initial investment and have the confidence that they would recoup their money.
Brad, always appreciate your time. Thanks for the update, and look forward to talking to you in 2025.
Thank you, and Merry Christmas.
You as well. Brad White, Executive Director, MDOT, on the Gallo Radio Show.